that some of the hearts are a little misshapen. So you have to look for features on the heart's surface to determine which side's the front and which side's the back. Okay? So this line right here, labeled number 7, that's going to be key to figuring out that this is the anterior side. You have this big mark that runs all the way down the front. Okay? On the back side of the heart, you have a line also, but it runs straight down. There's a third line that runs kind of like this one, but it's a little bit shorter. Okay, so this one, again, one area to the next. It's the bigger of the two lines that goes diagonally. The back you can tell because it has this straight line going down it. Also, if you look right here, you can see that there's a crease in the back of the heart. Right through here, there's a crease. Okay, that's another way you can tell that it's the posterior or back side of the heart. Now, there are a handful of structures that you're going to need to identify externally, including some of the vessels. Now, I want you to do your best to identify these, and I'll give you ways that you can do that as we go through the internal anatomy. But these 3 that I'm going to point out right now are very, very difficult to find. And if you were given a heart externally like this, I would not anticipate that you can identify them. Okay, just because you really do need to see like where, like which ventricle they're going into, for example. So, I don't want you to worry about knowing the aorta or the superior or inferior vena cava. The inferior vena cava we can actually see very, very nicely, but the reason I'm crossing that one off is because we identify it in the same place that we identify the coronary sinus, and one of them had to go. So I just picked this one since it's superior and inferior vena cava are in the same little box, so it's kind of an easier one. But you will need to know, so the 2 vessels you are responsible for knowing are the coronary sinus and the pulmonary trunk. Now the pulmonary trunk, looking externally, is very easy to see because it is the most anterior vessel. So if you figure out which side is the front, the vessel that is also in the front, or the most anterior, will be the pulmonary trunk. Okay? Just so you know, behind that we have the aorta. So the aorta would be next in line to that. But again, I'm not going to emphasize that one as much because it is a lot harder to identify. But do go ahead and identify these for the sake of increasing your knowledge so that you can do better on the models, because you will still need to know that on the models. Okay, so other external structures you need to know are the ventricles. So when we look at the posterior, the ventricles line up pretty nicely with these musculatures here. So if we have a pin on this musculature below the fatty line right here, that would be left ventricle. Again, we're looking at the anterior side, so this would be the left side. And up here would be the right. Now in the posterior view, we have this line that goes right down the middle, so this is actually an even better differentiation, but you should know it from both sides. Here, if we're looking at it, would be the right ventricle on this side and the left ventricle on this side. So now you see why it's important to know the front from the back, right? Because if we just give you a single hemisphere, you need to be able to identify whether it's the front or the back so that you can identify the ventricles correctly. All right, now for the auricles, looking at the anterior side of the heart, the auricle would be, there's one right here that sits just on top and one that sits kind of on the side. This is our right auricle. This is the left auricle. They kind of look like salami. Just saying. All right, so that's how you'll be able to see them. They're kind of a darker, meaty color, and they have white specks in them, just like salami. We're going to show you the atrium. We're going to pin just below. So the right atrium would be pinned somewhere in this region, left atrium somewhere in this region. Again, if we pin the auricle, we would not be asking for the atrium that lies beneath it. We'd be asking for the auricle. Okay? If we're asking for the atrium, we'll specifically not pin the auricle so that there is no confusion of what we're asking for. Now looking at the posterior side, we would have the left atrium here, above the crease. Well, above or below, but basically in the fatty region near the crease. And then here you can see the right auricle. So again, we wouldn't put the pin there. If we were asking for the atrium, we'd put it below it. All right, another thing that you'll need to know on the posterior side is the coronary sinus. That's where this is going through, okay? When you look at the PSU website, if you want to use this as a resource, you'll note that this is actually going through the inferior vena cava, but because we also identify the coronary sinus here, we're gonna just call this coronary sinus. Okay, so if you see a hole there, that's why, so don't be confused by that. You'll also kind of see there's a little triangle here, so it's like smack dab in the middle. Just follow this line all the way up, and that'll be the coronary sinus. Okay, you may or may not have the hole here. One more thing before I move on to the other ones below, or the interior view. We have the apex, which is just the base of the heart here, and anterior view, again, just the point of the heart. Okay, any questions before we go to the internal structures? Yes?
So you said we don't have to know the superior and inferior vena cava?
Correct.
Okay.
So know it on the model still, but because those two specifically are actually really iffy to find, I would rather just worry about them on the models. All right? But do know the pulmonary drum. Okay, so now let's see what this thing looks like when you cut it open. When we cut it open, we're going to be bisecting it, so you're going to be cutting essentially the anterior portion off of the posterior portion, so you're going to cut it in half that way. The best way to do that, this line is a great way if you kind of cut around just like that, but because it's at a slant, that can sometimes create an awkward cut, so I kind of like to use the back, since this line goes straight down, and then you just cut it around like that, so you're cutting the front off of the back. And in doing so, you'll be able to see both ventricles at the same time. If you cut it any other way, then it gets kind of awkward looking. So if you cut it the way I explained, you'll have it look like this, where you can see both ventricles and atrium. Now, if you remember back to when we were doing the heart on Monday, we were able to see the ventricles a lot better, or excuse me, the atrium a lot better on the posterior side of the heart, remember? When you open up the heart, that's often true. So if you look at this heart, and I'll point out the reasoning for like why I know this in a second so that you guys can also know this. But you see that the atriums are only on this side of the heart, and you don't really see them too well on this side, okay? That often happens, all right? So if you don't have atrium showing on both sides, that's okay. All right, so it's kind of the nature of how we cut it. Now, the reason that I know that this is the atrium versus the ventricle, which will be below, obviously, is that this region right here is the atrioventricular valve. And I know that because I see the chordae tendineae. So those chordae tendineae are going to be really helpful in helping decide a lot of things about the internal structure of the heart. So if we can find those chordae tendineae, we've now found essentially like 5 or 6 structures. We know that they're attaching to the papillary muscles, so all the muscles that they go down to are the papillary muscles. We know the structure above them, right here, will be the atrioventricular valve. We know that everything below that is going to be a ventricle. Everything above that is an atrium. Okay, so the first thing I like to do when I cut open the heart is find this chordae tendineae section, because it'll help you orient yourself for what you're looking at. All right. If we look on this side, we can see chordae tendineae over here, and the other half of the valve that was here also. So we also know that this is ventricle, and that what would have been above this is atrium. Now, this area right here is still part of the ventricle, all right? The vessel or the valve would stop right here and attach to this area here. This is the area of the ventricle that's going to be pumping blood to the aorta. So this little patch right there, and actually right here would be the aorta. So remember, there's going to be this holding cavity and then a passageway also where it's going to be dumping blood into the systemic or pulmonary system, depending on which side you're looking at. Now, one more important thing that I forgot to note: how do you tell the right from the left when you have the heart open like this? The larger one's the left one, all right? The left side of the heart pumps blood to the entire body, whereas the right side of the heart only pumps blood to the lungs. So you have a lot more musculature on that left side, and the actual cavity itself is bigger. So the bigger side will be the left side. Smaller side will be the right side, okay? So a few more things to note about the anatomy. I pointed out the valves. So if we know that this is the left ventricle, then what valve would this be? Bicuspid, right? You try before you bi, so bicuspid comes second in the left ventricle. And here you can see, this one's kind of a darker color, but here we can see another valve. What valve would this be? The tricuspid, right? The other one. And their general name is atrioventricular valves. So for this valve, if this is the valve, that means that down here we have the ventricle, up here would be the atrium. Okay, now the other valve if you're cut it open all the way like this, which you can do, but I recommend doing it a little bit lower. So actually, you're just going to do the top of the heart first, so that you don't cut open the semilunar valves. Okay, because you want to maintain those. Remember, I said that the semilunar valves kind of look like little bubbles on bubble wrap. We have them surrounding this aorta right here. So this is basically a broken piece of bubble wrap that was a part of the semilunar valve. You have another one here, that'd be the second one. And then the third one is actually over here. So remember, it's kind of like a clamshell, so if you shut it, this would be right here. That'd be the third one. So if you don't cut it as far open, you'll be able to see all three of those in a ring around this upper portion of the heart, okay? This is where they are. I'm showing them so that you like have a better idea of where to look for them. This is not what I would consider a testable semilunar valve. For two reasons, it's broken like that, and I would want to see it a little more associated with the vessel that it's attached to. So look for these. There are a few hearts. I'm going to give you guys the option of getting a heart that's already bisected or getting a heart that you bisect yourself. A few of the ones that I passed out that were already bisected had some pretty good examples of semilunar valves, okay? So they're going to be white in color, and they're just going to be little bubble wrap areas in the tops. You're only really going to be able to, or I anticipate you're only going to be able to see the one that leads to the aorta, so you're only going to be able to find the aortic valve, because the pulmonary valve is way up in the right atrium. Usually, if you use your hand, you can actually like shove your fingers through the semilunar valves, and your finger will come out the correct vessels. So if you were to shove it through the left ventricle, you want to shove like your finger up towards the middle if you're going to do this, because the valves actually kind of cross in the middle of the heart. It'll come out the aorta. The right atrium leading to the pulmonary trunk is actually really hard to do. For whatever reason, that passageway is really, really long. So unless you have like ridiculously long fingers, you'll probably be able to do it. So for that one, what you can do is you can use one of the blue pointers and put the pointing end up, so not the pointy end, but the blue part. You can use that to kind of wiggle your way through and point it out that way. And if you do that, you can find the passageway. That can sometimes give you clues to where the valves are. All right. That's basically it for valves. So I guess the last two things to cover, the trabeculae carnae. That's again just the lattice that we see inside of the heart. I covered chordae tendineae and papillary muscles. Interventricular septum is essentially it's the myocardial layer that splits the left and right ventricles. You'll see that again on this side as well. Now for the three layers, you'll be able to say those pretty clearly. And the key with this, when we pin them, is that we're going to be asking for the layers. Okay, so note that. If we put the pin on the border right here, then we'd be asking for the endocardium. So we'd pin the endocardium, but we'd put it close to like where we'd be showing the layers in this region. So here, for example, or over here. And we'd, again, be asking the question, identify the layer for endocardium. Then the meaty portion here that makes up the middle, the myocardium, myo for muscle. And then the outer layer here that kind of looks like that fatty layer, that would be the the epicardium. You'd actually be able to pin that layer. It's pretty clear that it is the epicardium at that point. Okay, any questions? Yes?
Where's the right atrium?
The right atrium, here we have the right side. We have our chordae tendineae right here. So above the chordae tendineae and the AV valve, which is right here, we have the atrium. So it has kind of this extra flap right here. That's part of the